The knock came at 9:47 p.m., three sharp blows that shattered the quiet like gunfire. Evan Brooks froze in the doorway of his daughter's bedroom, her goodnight kiss still warm on his cheek. No one knocked like that unless something was wrong. Through the peephole, he saw her, Natalie Hale, his boss, CEO of Hale Industries, standing in the dim hallway of his modest apartment building. Her eyes were dark with fury. When he opened the door, her first words confirmed his worst fear. "You're fired." But before we dive into how Evan's world came crashing down in a single night, hit that like button and drop a comment telling me what city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The evening had started like any other Tuesday. Unremarkable, predictable, safe. Evan Brooks moved through his nightly routine with the precision of a man who'd survived by making every motion count. Dinner at 6:30, microwaved mac and cheese with a side of baby carrots that Mia would inevitably ignore. Bath time at 7:15, complete with the ongoing negotiation about whether soap was truly necessary. Pajamas at 7:45, the ones with the purple unicorns that were getting too small, but that Mia refused to abandon. By 9:30, they'd made it to the final checkpoint, bedtime story. Evan sat on the edge of Mia's twin bed, her small body curled beneath a comforter covered in stars and moons. The lamp on her nightstand cast everything in warm amber, softening the worn edges of the furniture, the scuff marks on the walls, the way her bookshelf sagged under the weight of picture books they'd read 100 times. "Daddy," Mia said, her voice already drowsy, "can we read the one about the princess who builds a rocket ship?" Evan smiled despite the exhaustion pulling at his bones. "Again, we read that one yesterday." "It's my favorite." She clutched her stuffed elephant, a gift from her mother years ago, against her chest. "Please?" There was no resisting that word when it came from Mia's lips. There never had been. "All right, Bug, one more time." He pulled the book from the shelf, settled back against the headboard, and began to read. His voice found the familiar rhythm, the rise and fall of each sentence, the character voices that made Mia giggle. For these few minutes, the world contracted to just this: father and daughter, story and warmth, the simple magic of being present. When he reached the final page, Mia's breathing had already deepened into the steady pattern of sleep. Evan closed the book quietly, brushed a strand of dark hair from her forehead, and pressed a kiss to her temple. "I love you, Bug," he whispered. She didn't stir. He was halfway to the door, moving with the careful silence of someone who'd learned that even the smallest sound could shatter hard-won peace, when the knock came. 3 blows. Sharp. Demanding. Wrong. Evan's hand froze on the doorframe. His heartbeat spiked instantly, adrenaline flooding his system with a force that surprised him. He glanced back at Mia, still sleeping, thank God, and pulled her door nearly closed, leaving just a crack of light from the hallway. The knock came again. Harder this time, more insistent. Who the hell knocks like that at 9:47 on a Tuesday night? His mind cycled through possibilities as he moved down the short hallway. Building manager? No, Mrs. Chen always called first. Neighbor complaint? Unlikely. They were quiet, too quiet probably. Emergency? His chest tightened. Had something happened? Was someone hurt? He reached the door and peered through the peephole. What he saw made no sense. Natalie Hale stood in the hallway, her posture rigid, her expression carved from stone. She wore a black blazer over a white blouse, her dark hair pulled back in the severe style she favored for board meetings. This wasn't the woman who occasionally smiled at him across the conference table or who'd sent flowers when his wife died. This was the CEO who'd built a fortune from nothing, who'd crushed competitors and rebuilt failing companies with ruthless efficiency. This was the woman who employed him. And she was standing outside his apartment at nearly 10 p.m., looking like she wanted to burn the building down. Evan's hand trembled slightly as he unlocked the deadbolt. He opened the door 6 inches, creating a barrier between his work life and his home, between the man he was during business hours and the father who'd just kissed his daughter goodnight. "Ms. Hale." His voice came out uncertain. "Is everything—" "You're fired." The words hit him like a physical blow, direct, brutal, final. Evan blinked, his mind refusing to process what he'd just heard. I'm sorry, what? You're fired, Evan. Natalie's voice was cold, clipped, each syllable a hammer strike. Effective immediately. The hallway seemed to tilt. Evan gripped the door frame, his knuckles going white. I don't understand. What happened? Did I... Let me in. It wasn't a request. Evan glanced over his shoulder instinctively, toward Mia's room. His daughter was asleep 15 feet away. His home, the small, shabby, carefully maintained sanctuary he'd built from the ruins of his life, was about to be invaded by the one person who held his livelihood in her hands. Ms. Hale, it's late, and my daughter is sleeping. Can we talk about this tomorrow at the office? Natalie's eyes flashed with something dangerous. We can talk about it now, here, or I can make sure every door in this industry closes before you wake up tomorrow morning. Your choice. The threat hung in the air between them, sharp and real. Evan's jaw clenched. He wanted to slam the door in her face, wanted to tell her exactly where she could shove her threat and her job. But beneath the anger was something more primal, fear. Raw, clawing fear. Because he had a 6-year-old daughter sleeping down the hall. He had rent due in 2 weeks. He had health insurance that covered Mia's asthma medication, car payments, student loans from the degree he'd never finished, credit cards he was barely keeping current. He had a life balanced on the thinnest edge imaginable, and Natalie Hale was about to kick it over. Fine, he said quietly. But keep your voice down. He stepped back and let her in. Natalie moved past him into the small living room with the confidence of someone who'd never questioned her right to any space she occupied. Her gaze swept the apartment in seconds. The worn couch with the blanket thrown over the torn armrest, the coffee table covered in Mia's coloring books, the kitchenette with dishes still in the sink, the wall where family photos hung in mismatched frames. Evan closed the door softly and turned to face her, his arms crossed over his chest. In his t-shirt and sweatpants, barefoot in his own home, he felt completely exposed. Natalie, in her tailored suit and heels, looked like she'd stepped out of a different universe entirely. All right, he said, keeping his voice low and controlled. You want to tell me what this is about? Natalie turned to face him fully, and for the first time he saw past the anger in her expression to something else underneath, something that looked almost like pain. When was the last time you slept, Evan? The question caught him off guard. What? When was the last time you actually slept? More than 4 hours? Without waking up in a panic about deadlines or emails or whether you'd locked down that contract? Evan's jaw tightened. I sleep fine. You're a terrible liar. Natalie took a step closer. When was the last time you ate a real meal? One that didn't come from a vending machine or a microwave? I don't see how my personal habits are relevant to... When was the last time you had a conversation with someone that wasn't about work? When was the last time you left the office before 8 p.m.? When was the last time you took a sick day? A vacation day? When was the last time you looked in the mirror and didn't see a ghost? Each question landed like an accusation. Evan felt his defenses rising, walls slamming into place. I do my job, he said, his voice hardening. I do it well. I've never missed a deadline, never dropped a project, never given you any reason to... You missed the ceremony tonight. The word stopped him cold. Natalie's expression shifted, and now there was no hiding what lay beneath her anger. It was disappointment, deep and cutting. The award ceremony, she continued, the one I told you about 3 weeks ago. The one where you were supposed to receive recognition for the Meridian Project. The one where I was going to announce your promotion to senior director. Evan's stomach dropped. Tonight was... That was tonight? 7 p.m. at the Regency, black tie. You were the guest of honor, Evan. Natalie's voice was quiet now, but somehow that made it worse. I stood on that stage and called your name, and you weren't there. Do you have any idea how that looked? Do you know what message that sent? He did know. He could picture it perfectly. The room full of executives and board members, Natalie at the podium, the awkward silence when no one came forward, the whispers, the assumptions. I forgot, Evan said, the words tasting like ash. I was working on the Chen account, and the proposal was due tomorrow, and I forgot. You forgot. Natalie repeated the words like they were evidence in a trial. You forgot about your own promotion because you were too busy working yourself to death on a proposal that isn't due until next Friday. The correction hit him like a slap. What? Friday, Evan. The Chen deadline is Friday. You've been killing yourself for an extra week you didn't need. Natalie moved closer, her heels clicking on the worn hardwood. And do you know how I know that? Because 3 weeks ago, I personally moved that deadline back to give you time to prepare for the ceremony. I sent you an email, you acknowledged it, and then you apparently erased it from your memory because you're so deep in this spiral that you can't even keep basic facts straight anymore. Evan felt the room closing in around him. He grabbed for words, for explanations, but they all crumbled before he could speak them. I've been watching you for months, Natalie continued, watching you disappear. You come in before everyone else and leave after everyone's gone. You eat lunch at your desk if you eat at all. You've lost weight. You have circles under your eyes, dark enough to be concerning. You snap at colleagues over minor issues. You're making small errors, nothing catastrophic, but mistakes you never would have made a year ago. I'm handling it, Evan said, but his voice lacked conviction. You're drowning. Natalie's voice softened slightly, and that somehow made it harder to hear. And you're doing it alone, and you're doing it quietly, and everyone has been too polite or too busy to say anything. But I'm not going to be polite anymore, Evan. I'm not going to watch you kill yourself one 60-hour week at a time. I have responsibilities, Evan shot back, anger finally breaking through his shock. I have a daughter to support, bills to pay, a life to maintain. I can't afford to slow down. I can't afford to be anything less than perfect because if I fail, his voice cracked. If I fail, Mia pays the price. And what price is she paying now? Natalie's question was quiet but devastating. When her father is too exhausted to really see her, too stressed to be present, when you're reading bedtime stories but thinking about quarterly reports? Evan's hands clenched into fists at his sides. You don't know anything about my relationship with my daughter. You're right, I don't. Natalie held his gaze. But I know what it looks like when someone is running so hard from grief that they can't see they're running straight off a cliff. I know what it looks like when someone mistakes motion for progress, when they confuse exhaustion with virtue. I know because I've been exactly where you are. The admission hung in the air between them. Evan stared at her, seeing her clearly for the first time since she'd walked through his door. Beneath the CEO armor, beneath the anger and the authority, was someone who understood, someone who knew. Sarah's been gone for 18 months, Natalie said softly. And you haven't stopped moving since the funeral. Not really. You took 3 days of bereavement leave and came back to work like nothing had happened. You threw yourself into every project, volunteered for every assignment, stayed late every night. Everyone thought you were coping, being strong. But strength isn't supposed to look like this, Evan. Hearing his wife's name spoken aloud in his apartment, in the home they'd shared, hit him with unexpected force. Evan turned away, his throat tight, his eyes burning. I don't have the luxury of falling apart, he said hoarsely. Mia needs me. The bills need to be paid. Life doesn't stop just because... He couldn't finish the sentence. No one's asking you to fall apart. I'm asking you to stop pretending you're fine when you're clearly not. Evan spun back to face her. So what, you're firing me? That's your solution? Take away the one thing that's keeping me functional? I'm not firing you from your job, Natalie said firmly. I'm firing you from this unsustainable, self-destructive way you've been living. I'm firing you from the 60-hour weeks, from the isolation, from the belief that suffering in silence is somehow noble. Evan stared at her, confusion and anger warring in his chest. I don't understand. Effective immediately, your hours are capped at 40 per week. You will leave the office by 6 p.m. unless there's a genuine emergency, and I get to define what constitutes an emergency. You will take your full lunch break. You will use your vacation days. You will attend the grief counseling sessions that HR has been offering for the past year, and you will accept support from people who want to help you. Each mandate felt like a chain wrapping around him. You can't just, I can, and I am. Natalie's voice was steel. Consider it a condition of your continued employment. Fight me on this, and yes, you will be fired. Actually, fired. But work with me, let me help you, and you keep your job. You keep your promotion. You keep your health insurance and your salary, and everything you're so terrified of losing. Evan shook his head, a bitter laugh escaping him. This is insane. You show up at my home at 10 o'clock at night, tell me I'm fired, and then explain it's actually an intervention disguised as a termination. What gives you the right to... I lost someone too. The words cut through Evan's anger like a knife through fabric. He stopped, his mouth still open, the rest of his sentence dying unspoken. Natalie's expression shifted, the CEO mask cracking to reveal something raw underneath. 7 years ago, my husband, Daniel, heart attack. He was 41. We'd just celebrated our 15th anniversary. We had plans, so many plans. Her voice wavered slightly. And when he died, I did exactly what you're doing now. I worked. I worked until I couldn't see straight, until my hands shook from caffeine and stress, until I collapsed in my office and spent 3 days in the hospital with what the doctors politely called exhaustion. They told me I was killing myself. I didn't believe them. I couldn't afford to believe them, because if I stopped moving, I'd have to feel everything, and that was unthinkable. Evan felt his anger deflating, leaving only exhaustion in its wake. What changed? My sister showed up at my house, very much like I just showed up at yours, and told me she wasn't going to watch me destroy myself. She gave me an ultimatum, get help or lose her. It was the hardest thing anyone had ever said to me, and it was the thing that saved my life. Natalie's eyes met his, and they were bright with unshed tears. So I'm doing for you what she did for me. I'm refusing to be polite. I'm refusing to look away. I'm being the person who says the hard thing because no one else will. The fight drained out of Evan completely. He sank onto the arm of his couch, his head in his hands. I don't know how to do this differently. Work is the only thing that makes sense anymore. Everything else is just... He gestured helplessly. Chaos, pain, memories that hurt too much to look at. But work has rules, clear objectives, success and failure that I can measure. It's the only place where I still feel like myself. That's not yourself, Evan. That's just the part of you that knows how to survive. Natalie sat down on the couch properly, maintaining a careful distance but offering her presence. The rest of you, the part that laughs, that connects, that feels joy and not just obligation, that part is buried under so much armor that you've forgotten it exists. Maybe it doesn't anymore, Evan said quietly. Maybe that version of me died with Sarah. No? Natalie's voice was firm. I don't believe that. You just read your daughter a bedtime story. You kissed her goodnight. You built a home for her in the middle of your grief. That's not a dead man, Evan. That's a man who's forgotten he deserves the same care he gives to everyone else. Evan looked up at her, this woman who'd just upended his entire life in the space of 15 minutes. Why do you care? Why go to all this trouble for one employee? Because you're not just one employee. You're brilliant at what you do. You're kind to your colleagues. You're raising a daughter on your own while navigating loss that would break most people. And because... She paused, seeming to choose her words carefully. Because I see myself in you. The version of myself I was 7 years ago. And if I can keep you from learning the lessons I learned the hard way, then maybe all that pain I went through will have meant something. Silence settled over the small living room. From down the hall, Evan could hear the faint hum of Mia's white noise machine, the familiar sound that marked the boundaries of his world. What if I can't do it? He asked finally, his voice small. What if I try to work less, to be more present, and I just fail? What if without work to focus on, I fall apart completely? Then you fall apart with support around you instead of alone in your office at 2 a.m. Natalie's voice was gentle. Evan, healing isn't about being strong all the time. It's about being honest about when you're not. It's about letting people help you carry the weight until you're strong enough to carry it yourself again. Evan closed his eyes, feeling tears finally slip free. I miss her so much. Every single day, I wake up and for just a second, I forget she's gone. And then I remember. And it's like losing her all over again. Work was the only thing that made that feeling stop. It doesn't make it stop, Natalie said softly. It just postpones it. And the longer you postpone it, the worse it gets when it finally catches up with you. Trust me. So what do I do? You start small. You go to counseling. You leave work on time. You have dinner with your daughter, real dinner, not just food consumed in the same room. You call a friend. You take a walk. You let yourself remember Sarah without punishing yourself for it. You let yourself grieve. I don't know if I can. You don't have to know. You just have to try. Natalie stood, smoothing her blazer back into place. The CEO armor was sliding back on, but something had fundamentally changed between them. I'm going to check in with you, Evan. Weekly at first, then as needed. If you're not taking care of yourself, I'll know, and I'll call you on it. Is that clear? Evan nodded, too overwhelmed to speak. Natalie moved toward the door, then paused and turned back. For what it's worth, I think Sarah would be proud of you. Not for working yourself to death, but for everything you've done for Mia. For keeping going when it would have been easier to give up. You just need to remember that living and surviving aren't the same thing, and Mia deserves a father who's doing both. She opened the door and stepped into the hallway, then looked back one more time. Get some sleep, Evan. Real sleep. That's an order. And then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, leaving Evan alone in his small apartment with the weight of everything that had just happened. He sat there for a long time, staring at nothing, feeling the cracks in his carefully constructed armor spreading wider. Down the hall, Mia shifted in her sleep, making the small sound she always made when she was dreaming. Evan stood on shaky legs and walked to her room, pushing the door open just enough to see her. She lay on her back, her stuffed elephant tucked under one arm, her face peaceful in sleep. She looked so much like Sarah it made his chest ache. "I'm gonna try, Bug," he whispered into the darkness. "I don't know how, but I'm going to try." He stood there watching his daughter sleep, feeling something shift inside him, something painful and necessary and terrifying. For the first time in 18 months, he let himself acknowledge the truth he'd been running from. He couldn't keep going like this. Something had to change, and maybe, just maybe, that change had started tonight. Evan didn't sleep that night. He lay in bed staring at the ceiling, watching shadows from the streetlight outside shift across the plaster, replaying every word Natalie had said until they blurred together into a cacophony of accusations and uncomfortable truths. When morning finally came, pale and gray through his bedroom window, he felt hollowed out, empty in a way that had nothing to do with exhaustion and everything to do with the sudden absence of the armor he'd been wearing for 18 months. Mia woke at 6:30, like always, padding into his room with her elephant dragging behind her and climbing into bed without asking permission. This was their routine, had been since Sarah died, since the nights when Mia's nightmares had been so frequent that it was easier to just let her start the morning here, curled against his side. "Daddy, you look sad," she said, her small hand patting his cheek. Evan managed a smile that felt like it might crack his face. "Just tired, Bug. Did you have bad dreams?" Something like that. She considered this with the serious expression she got when thinking hard about something. Mama used to say that bad dreams can't hurt you when the sun comes up. The mention of Sarah sent a spike of pain through his chest, but Evan forced himself to breathe through it instead of deflecting. Maybe that was the first small step, not flinching every time his daughter mentioned her mother. "Mama was right about a lot of things," he said softly. "I miss her." "I know, Bug. Me too." Mia nestled closer, and they lay there in silence while the room grew brighter and the sounds of the building waking up filtered through the walls. Evan held his daughter and tried to remember the last time he'd done this without simultaneously composing emails in his head or mentally reviewing his schedule for the day. He couldn't. At 7, he got up and went through the motions of breakfast. Cereal for Mia, coffee for himself. But as he watched her eat, swinging her legs and humming a tuneless song, something Natalie had said kept echoing in his mind. Real dinner, not just food consumed in the same room. How many meals had he sat across from Mia while being completely absent? How many conversations had he missed because he was too busy thinking about work? How many moments had slipped past him while he was too focused on surviving to actually live? "What do you want to do today?" he asked. Mia looked up, surprised. It was Wednesday. Wednesday meant daycare until 5:30 while he worked. Wednesday had a script, and this question wasn't in it. "Don't you have to go to work?" she asked. The question hit him harder than it should have. His 6-year-old daughter expected him to be gone, expected work to come first, because that's what he'd taught her through 18 months of carefully maintained absence. "Not until later," he said, making the decision in that moment. So, what should we do this morning? Her face lit up with such pure joy that it almost broke him. Can we make pancakes? The ones with the faces? They hadn't made pancakes since before Sarah died. It had been their Sunday tradition, elaborate pancakes with blueberry eyes and strawberry smiles, the kitchen a disaster zone of flour and batter, all three of them laughing while the smoke alarm occasionally went off. Yeah, Evan said, his throat tight. Yeah, we can make pancakes. They made a mess. Flour ended up on the floor, batter splattered on Mia's pajamas, and the first two pancakes were burned beyond recognition. But Mia laughed, really laughed, the kind of full-body giggle that she used to have all the time, but that had become rarer in the past year. And Evan found himself laughing too, something loosening in his chest that had been locked tight for so long he'd forgotten it was there. By the time they sat down to eat their slightly lopsided pancakes with their crooked blueberry smiles, it was almost 8:30. Evan should have been at his desk an hour ago. He should have been answering emails, reviewing reports, staying ahead of the endless tide of work that never stopped coming. Instead, he was sitting with his daughter, eating pancakes, and for the first time in months, he was exactly where he needed to be. He dropped Mia at daycare at 9:15, apologizing to Mrs. Patterson for being late. "Don't you worry about it," she said, but Evan could see the surprise in her expression. He was never late, never off schedule, never anything but precisely on time. The drive to Hale Industries felt different that morning. Evan kept expecting anxiety to hit him, the familiar spike of adrenaline that came from being behind, from not being the first one in the office. But instead, he just felt tired, bone-deep tired in a way that had nothing to do with one sleepless night and everything to do with 18 months of running on fumes. He parked in his usual spot at 9:45, practically noon by his recent standards, and walked into the building with a knot of dread in his stomach. Word about last night's ceremony would have spread. People would have questions. There would be looks, whispers, the kind of quiet judgment that came with public failure. But when he stepped off the elevator onto the 8th floor, the reception area was quiet. His colleagues moved through their morning routines with the same focused energy as always. A few people nodded at him. Sarah Chen from marketing waved from her desk. Everything was normal. Except it wasn't. Because Evan knew that everything had changed, even if no one else could see it yet. He made it to his office and closed the door, leaning against it and closing his eyes. His desk was exactly as he'd left it yesterday. Neat, organized, covered in project folders and strategic plans, and the kind of work that used to make him feel purposeful, but now just looked overwhelming. The email notification on his computer showed 47 unread messages. Before, he would have worked through them immediately, responding to each one with the careful attention that had made him valuable. Now he stared at the number and felt nothing but exhaustion. A knock on his door made him straighten. "Come in." Marcus Chen, one of his colleagues from the operations team, stuck his head in. "Hey man, got a minute?" Evan gestured to the chair across from his desk, and Marcus came in, closing the door behind him. They'd worked together for 3 years, had collaborated on dozens of projects, but had never quite crossed the line from colleagues to friends. Evan had made sure of that. Friends asked questions. Friends noticed things. "I wanted to check in," Marcus said, settling into the chair. "I was at the ceremony last night." Evan's stomach dropped. "Look, You don't need to explain," Marcus interrupted. "I just wanted you to know that Natalie handled it well. She said you were dealing with a family matter and that the promotion would be announced formally next week. No one thought anything of it." The kindness in his voice was almost harder to take than judgment would have been. "I appreciate that," Evan said quietly. Marcus hesitated, then leaned forward. "Can I say something that might be overstepping?" "Sure." "You look like hell, Evan. Like, seriously. We've all noticed. No one knew what to say. But if you need help with anything, if you need someone to pick up some slack while you deal with whatever you're dealing with, just ask, okay?" The offer sat between them, genuine and uncomfortable. Evan had spent so long insisting he was fine, pushing away any suggestion that he needed support, that he'd forgotten what it felt like to have someone simply offer it. "Thank you," he managed. I'll keep that in mind." After Marcus left, Evan sat at his desk and stared at his computer screen without really seeing it. His phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Natalie. "My office, 10:30. He checked the time. 10:20. Of course, she was already orchestrating his day. Part of him wanted to resent the intrusion, but a larger part was almost relieved to have someone else making decisions, even small ones. At exactly 10:30, he knocked on the door to Natalie's corner office on the 12th floor. "Come in." The office was exactly what you'd expect from a CEO, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city, modern furniture in cool grays and blacks, abstract art on the walls. But there were personal touches too. Photographs on the credenza of what looked like family gatherings, a small sculpture that seemed handmade, a bookshelf filled with an eclectic mix of business books and fiction. Natalie sat behind her desk, reading something on her tablet. She looked up when he entered, her expression unreadable. "Close the door and sit." Evan did as instructed, feeling like a student called to the principal's office. In the daylight, with both of them back in their professional roles, last night felt almost surreal. Had she really shown up at his apartment? Had he really cried in front of his boss? "How are you feeling?" she asked. The question was so direct it caught him off guard. "Honestly, I don't know. Confused? Tired? Unsettled." "Good." He blinked. "Good?" "If you felt fine this morning, it would mean nothing I said last night sank in." Natalie set down her tablet and gave him her full attention. Being unsettled means you're actually thinking about it instead of just dismissing it and going back to business as usual. "I made pancakes with my daughter this morning," Evan heard himself say. "We haven't done that in a long time." Something shifted in Natalie's expression, warming it. "How was it?" "Messy. The kitchen looks like a disaster zone." He smiled despite himself. But she laughed, really laughed, and I realized I couldn't remember the last time I'd heard her do that. That's a good start. I was also late to work for the first time in 2 years, and I have 47 emails I haven't answered, and I can feel myself starting to panic about all the things I'm not doing right now. Natalie nodded as if this was exactly what she'd expected. That feeling, that panic about not being productive every single second, that's what we're going to work on. It's not real, Evan. It's just anxiety disguised as urgency. It feels real. I know it does. But here's what's actually real. Those emails will still be there in an hour. The world didn't end because you made breakfast with your daughter. Your value as an employee, as a person, isn't measured by how quickly you respond to messages or how many hours you log. Evan wanted to argue, to explain all the reasons why that wasn't true, why constant availability and relentless productivity were the only things keeping him employed. But before he could speak, Natalie continued. "I've already spoken with HR and your direct reports. Your workload is being adjusted. The projects that don't require your specific expertise are being redistributed. You're being taken off any assignment that requires late nights or weekend work for the next 3 months. 3 months? Evan's voice came out sharper than he intended. That's going to make me look intelligent, self-aware, like someone who understands that sustainable performance is more valuable than burnout. Natalie's tone was firm. And before you argue, know that this isn't negotiable. It's already done. Evan felt control slipping through his fingers, and with it came a surge of panic. You can't just... I have responsibilities, projects that are counting on me. If you pull me back now, then those projects will continue with other people leading them, and they'll be fine. You're good at your job, Evan, but you're not irreplaceable. No one is. And the sooner you accept that, the sooner you can stop treating every assignment like it's a matter of life and death. The word stung, but beneath the sting was something else, something that felt almost like relief. I've also made you an appointment, Natalie continued, pulling a business card from her desk drawer and sliding it across to him. Dr. Rebecca Hart. She specializes in grief counseling. Your first session is Friday at 4. Evan picked up the card, turning it over in his fingers. I don't need therapy. Everyone needs therapy, you especially. This is non-negotiable, Evan. Consider it a condition of your employment. You can't force me to go to therapy. I can't force you to engage with it meaningfully, but I can absolutely make attendance mandatory. And I am. Natalie's expression softened slightly. I know this feels invasive. I know it feels like I'm overstepping, but I've been where you are, and I know that left to your own devices. You'll keep running until you collapse, so I'm taking the decision out of your hands. Evan set the card down on the desk. What if I refuse? Then you're fired. Actually fired this time. And before you try to call that bluff, know that I'm completely serious. I will not watch you destroy yourself. I will not enable it. So you can either work with me and keep your job, or you can fight me and lose everything you're trying so hard to protect. They stared at each other across the desk, and Evan realized with a sinking feeling that she meant every word. This wasn't a negotiation. It wasn't even really a choice. It was an ultimatum delivered with absolute conviction. "Why do you even care?" he asked, and this time the question came from a place of genuine confusion rather than defensiveness. "You have a company to run, hundreds of employees. Why go to all this trouble for one person?" Natalie was quiet for a moment, and when she spoke, her voice was softer than he'd ever heard it. "Because when Daniel died, I had no one. My parents were gone. My sister lived across the country. My friends didn't know how to talk to me, so I worked. I worked until my hair started falling out, until I couldn't remember the last time I'd slept through the night, until I ended up in the hospital convinced I was having a heart attack when really I was just having a complete breakdown." She stood and walked to the window, looking out over the city. "And when I finally got help, when I finally let people in and started actually dealing with my grief instead of running from it, I promised myself something. I promised that if I ever saw someone heading down the same path I'd been on, I wouldn't look away. I wouldn't be polite. I wouldn't let them destroy themselves just because it was easier than having a hard conversation." Evan felt something in his chest crack open. "I'm scared," he admitted quietly. "I'm scared that if I stop moving, if I stop working, I'll fall apart completely. And I can't do that. Mia needs me to be strong." Natalie turned back to face him. "Strength isn't pretending you're not broken. Strength is admitting you are and doing the work to heal anyway. Mia doesn't need a perfect father. She needs a present one. And right now you're so busy performing strength that you can't actually be strong." The truth of it hit him like a physical blow. He'd been so focused on appearing okay, on maintaining the facade of having everything under control, that he'd lost sight of what actually mattered. "I don't know how to do this," he said. "I don't know how to be anything other than what I've been." You learn, you practice, you fail sometimes, and get back up. You let people help you. Natalie returned to her desk and sat down, her expression gentle but unyielding. "And you start by showing up to therapy on Friday and actually participating. Not just sitting there counting the minutes until you can leave, but engaging with it. Being honest, letting yourself be vulnerable." Evan picked up the business card again, staring at the name embossed on it. Dr. Rebecca Hart. The idea of sitting in a room with a stranger and talking about his feelings, about Sarah, about the gaping hole her death had left in his life, it felt impossible. But then he thought about Mia's laugh that morning, about the pancakes and the mess, and the moment of pure joy on her face, about all the moments like that he'd been missing because he was too busy surviving to actually live. "Okay," he said quietly. "I'll go." "And you'll actually try?" "I'll try." Natalie nodded, and for the first time since she'd shown up at his apartment last night, she smiled. It was small and tentative, but genuine. "That's all I'm asking. Just try." She glanced at her computer screen, then back at him. "You have a meeting with the design team at 11. I want you to go to that meeting, contribute like you normally would, and then I want you to leave the office by 6, not 6:30, not just one more email. 6 o'clock. Can you do that?" The idea of leaving at 6 when there would inevitably be more work to do made his anxiety spike. What if something urgent comes up? Then someone else will handle it. That's what a team is for, Evan. You've been operating like you're the only person capable of making decisions or solving problems. And it's not sustainable. It's also not true. "This is going to be harder than you think," he said. "I know. That's why I'm going to check in every day for the next week. We're going to have these conversations until the new routine becomes habit. And when you slip up, because you will slip up, we're going to talk about it and course correct." Evan felt like he was standing at the edge of a cliff, being asked to jump without knowing if there was anything to catch him. But he also knew, with absolute certainty, that staying where he was would eventually destroy him. "What about the promotion?" he asked. "After last night, the promotion stands. You earned it through excellent work, not through perfect attendance at ceremonies. We'll make the formal announcement next week, assuming you're actually taking care of yourself." Consider it motivation. She stood, signaling that the meeting was over. Evan rose as well, pocketing the business card for Dr. Hart. At the door, he paused and turned back. "Can I ask you something?" "Of course." "When you were going through this, when you were where I am now, did you ever feel like you were betraying him? Your husband? Like by moving forward, by healing, you were somehow forgetting him or leaving him behind?" Natalie's expression shifted, and for a moment the CEO disappeared entirely, leaving just a woman who understood his pain in ways no one else could. Every single day for the first 2 years. And then, gradually, I realized that Daniel wouldn't want me to destroy myself in his memory. He loved me. And love doesn't ask for self-destruction as proof of its existence. Her words hung in the air between them, heavy with shared understanding. "Sarah loved you," Natalie continued softly. "And she loved Mia. Do you think she'd want her daughter growing up with a father who was present but not really there? Who was so consumed by grief that he forgot how to live?" Evan's eyes burned. "No, she'd hate it." "Then honor her by living, really living, not just surviving. She deserves to be remembered by someone who's whole enough to hold those memories without breaking." Evan nodded, not trusting his voice. He left the office before the tears could fall, walking quickly to the bathroom where he locked himself in a stall and let himself cry for the first time since Sarah's funeral. He cried for her, for Mia, for the 18 months he'd lost to grief disguised as productivity. He cried for the man he'd been before loss had carved him hollow, and for the uncertain path ahead that felt both terrifying and necessary. When he finally emerged, eyes red but chest feeling lighter than it had in months, it was 10:55. He splashed cold water on his face, straightened his tie, and headed to the design team meeting. For the next hour, he did exactly what Natalie had instructed. He contributed. He listened. He engaged with his colleagues like a functional human being instead of a ghost who happened to occupy a chair. And when the meeting ended at 12:15, instead of rushing back to his desk to work through lunch, he did something he hadn't done in months. He went outside. The day was clear and cool, early autumn beginning to paint the trees in shades of gold and red. Evan walked to the small park 2 blocks from the office and sat on a bench, just watching people pass by. Parents with strollers, students with laptops, an elderly couple holding hands, life happening all around him while he'd been locked in his office, locked in his grief, locked in a version of himself that was slowly dying. His phone buzzed with work emails, each notification a small spike of anxiety. But instead of immediately checking them, he took a breath and made himself wait. The emails would still be there in 5 minutes, 10 minutes, an hour. The world wouldn't end. At 5:45, Evan saved the document he was working on, closed his laptop, and stood up from his desk. Around him, the office was still half full, people working late, making calls, the hum of productivity that used to pull at him like a magnet. He picked up his bag, turned off his desk lamp, and walked to the elevator. Each step felt like defiance. Each floor the elevator descended felt like falling. But when he reached the parking garage and climbed into his car, when he checked the time and saw it was 5:53, he felt something unexpected. Pride. He'd done it. One day, one small step. But he'd done it. He picked Mia up from daycare at 6:10, and her face when she saw him was worth every moment of anxiety the early departure had caused. "Daddy, you're here! You're early!" He lifted her up, hugging her tight. "I am. What should we do for dinner? Can we get pizza and eat it at the park?" Before, he would have said no. Too complicated, too much time, work emails to answer. But now, remembering Natalie's words, remembering the promise he'd made to himself, he smiled. "Yeah, Bug, we can do that." They got pizza and ate it at the park as the sun set, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. Mia chattered about her day at daycare, about the picture she'd drawn and the friend who'd shared cookies at snack time. And Evan listened, really listened, storing away each detail like the precious thing it was. On the drive home, Mia fell asleep in her car seat, her face peaceful in the streetlight glow. Evan glanced at her in the rearview mirror and felt something shift inside him. Not healed, not fixed, but different. Maybe Natalie was right. Maybe strength wasn't about holding everything together alone. Maybe it was about admitting you needed help and accepting it when it was offered. Maybe, just maybe, he could learn to live again instead of just survive. That night, after he'd carried Mia to bed and tucked her in, Evan stood in his kitchen and pulled out the business card Natalie had given him. Dr. Rebecca Hart. He stared at it for a long moment, then picked up his phone and sent a text to the number listed. "This is Evan Brooks. I have an appointment Friday at 4. I just wanted to confirm I'll be there." The response came almost immediately. "Confirmed. Looking forward to meeting you, Evan." He set the phone down and leaned against the counter, closing his eyes. Friday was 2 days away. 2 days to build up his courage. 2 days to prepare himself for the hardest conversation he'd probably ever have. But he'd do it. Because Mia deserved a father who was whole. Because Sarah's memory deserved to be honored by someone who remembered how to live. Because he deserved more than the half-life he'd been existing in. The road ahead was uncertain and terrifying. But for the first time in 18 months, Evan was ready to walk it. Friday arrived with the weight of inevitability. Evan spent the morning at work going through the motions, responding to emails with half his attention while the other half counted down the hours until 4 o'clock. The appointment loomed in his mind like a storm on the horizon, unavoidable and potentially devastating. At 3:30, he saved his work and shut down his computer. His hands were shaking slightly as he gathered his things. Leaving early again? Marcus appeared at his office door, but his tone was friendly, not accusatory. "Doctor's appointment," Evan said, which was technically true. "Good. Take care of yourself, man." The words followed him down to the parking garage, a reminder that people had noticed his deterioration even when he'd thought he was hiding it perfectly. How many colleagues had watched him unravel in slow motion, too polite or too uncomfortable to say anything? How many had wanted to help but didn't know how? Doctor. Rebecca Hart's office was in a converted brownstone 20 minutes across town. Evan found parking on a tree-lined street and sat in his car for 5 minutes, trying to convince himself to go inside. Every instinct screamed at him to start the engine, to drive away, to text Natalie that he'd tried but couldn't go through with it. But he thought of Mia's laughter over pancakes. He thought of the pizza in the park and the way her face had lit up when he'd arrived early at daycare. He thought of the 18 months he'd lost to survival mode and all the moments he'd continue to lose if nothing changed. He got out of the car. The reception area was warm and understated. Soft lighting, comfortable chairs, artwork that looked like actual paintings instead of corporate prints. A woman in her 50s sat behind a desk, and she smiled when he entered. "You must be Evan. I'm Patricia. Dr. Hart is just finishing up with her previous appointment. She'll be with you in a few minutes. Can I get you anything? Water? Coffee?" "I'm fine, thank you." He sat in one of the chairs and immediately regretted it. Now he was committed. Now he had to wait. He pulled out his phone and scrolled through work emails without really reading them, just needing something to do with his hands. 7 minutes later, a door opened and a woman in her early 40s emerged. She had kind eyes and an easy smile, dressed professionally, but not intimidatingly. "Evan? I'm Rebecca. Come on back." Her office was smaller than he'd expected, but somehow more comfortable for it. 2 chairs faced each other at an angle, a small table between them with a box of tissues placed carefully but not obtrusively. Bookshelves lined one wall. A window looked out onto a small garden. "Have a seat wherever you're comfortable," Rebecca said, closing the door behind them. Evan chose the chair closest to the window and sat rigidly, his hands clasped in his lap. Rebecca settled into the other chair with the ease of someone who'd done this thousands of times. "So," she said, "this is your first time in therapy?" "Yes." "How are you feeling about being here?" Evan wanted to lie, to say he was fine, to maintain the facade he'd perfected over 18 months. But something about Rebecca's expression, open, patient, genuinely curious, made the automatic deflection stick in his throat. "Terrified," he admitted, "and resentful. My boss basically forced me to come here." Rebecca nodded as if this was the most reasonable thing she'd ever heard. "Tell me about that." And so Evan did. He told her about Natalie showing up at his apartment, about the missed ceremony, about the ultimatum disguised as concern. He told her about the reduced hours and the mandatory boundaries and how all of it felt like control being stripped away piece by piece. Rebecca listened without interrupting, her expression neutral but attentive. When he finally ran out of words, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. "It sounds like you're angry about losing control," she said, "but also maybe relieved that someone cares enough to intervene?" The observation hit closer to the truth than Evan was comfortable with. "I don't know, maybe." "Let's talk about control for a minute. What does control mean to you?" Evan frowned, caught off guard by the question. "It means being able to handle things, being responsible, making sure everything gets done. And what happens if you're not in control? Things fall apart." The answer came automatically, a truth he'd believed for so long it had calcified into certainty. "Do they?" Rebecca's tone was gentle but challenging. "Or is that a story you've been telling yourself?" Evan's jaw tightened. "It's not a story, it's reality. I have a daughter who depends on me, bills that need to be paid, a job that requires me to be reliable. If I let go of control, all of that crumbles. Except you've been in complete control for the past 18 months, and from what you've told me, your life has still been falling apart. Just slowly, quietly, in ways you could pretend weren't happening." The words landed like a punch. Evan felt his defenses rising, the familiar urge to argue, to explain, to prove that he'd been doing everything right. But beneath that was something else, an exhausted part of him that was tired of fighting. "My wife died," he said, and hearing the words out loud made them feel more real somehow. 18 months ago, cancer. We had 8 weeks from diagnosis to—" He couldn't finish the sentence. "I'm so sorry," Rebecca said, and her compassion was so genuine it made his chest ache. "Everyone kept telling me I was strong, that I was handling it so well, that they didn't know how I did it." Evan's voice cracked. "And I believed them. I thought if I could just keep working, keep providing for Mia, keep everything running smoothly, then I was doing it right. Then Sarah's death wouldn't destroy us." "But it did destroy something, didn't it?" Evan looked up, meeting Rebecca's eyes. "It destroyed me. I just didn't want to admit it." The confession hung in the air between them, heavy and terrible and true. Evan felt tears threatening and tried to force them back, but Rebecca just pushed the tissue box slightly closer and said, "It's okay to cry here, Evan. That's what this space is for." So he cried. Not the silent, controlled tears he'd allowed himself a few times over the past year and a half, but real crying, the kind that came from somewhere deep and broken and long ignored. He cried for Sarah, for the future they'd planned that would never happen. He cried for Mia, for everything she'd lost and everything he'd failed to give her in his grief. He cried for himself, for the man he'd been before loss had hollowed him out and left only the machinery of survival. When the tears finally subsided, leaving him wrung out and exhausted, Rebecca's expression was still kind, still patient. "What you just did," she said quietly, "letting yourself actually feel the grief instead of pushing it away, that took more courage than any amount of 60-hour work weeks." Evan wiped his eyes, embarrassed by the breakdown despite her words. "I don't feel very courageous. Courage isn't the absence of fear or pain. It's the willingness to face them anyway." Rebecca leaned forward slightly. "You've been running from your grief for 18 months, Evan, and I understand why. Grief is terrifying. It's overwhelming. It feels like it might swallow you whole if you let it in. But here's what I need you to understand. Running from it doesn't make it go away. It just means you're always running, and eventually you get too tired to keep going. So what am I supposed to do? Just fall apart? Let the grief win?" Grief isn't a battle you can win or lose. It's a process you have to move through. And yes, sometimes that means falling apart. But falling apart with support, in a safe space where you can be put back together, that's different from the kind of falling apart you're afraid of. Evan shook his head. "I can't afford to fall apart. Mia needs me to be stable, strong. If I let myself— Wait, what if I told you that Mia needs you to be human more than she needs you to be strong? What if showing her that it's okay to grieve, to ask for help, to admit when you're struggling, what if that's actually the greatest gift you can give her?" The question stopped him. He thought about Mia, about the way she'd learned to be so careful around him, so aware of his moods, so quick to say she was fine even when she clearly wasn't. Had he taught her that? Had his own refusal to acknowledge pain taught his daughter to hide hers? "I don't know how to do this," he said, his voice small. "I don't know how to grieve without it destroying everything." "That's why you're here. That's what we're going to work on together." Rebecca's tone was firm but kind. "It's not going to be easy, and it's not going to be quick. Grief doesn't have a timeline. But you can learn to carry it without letting it consume you. You can learn to honor Sarah's memory while still living your own life." "What if I can't? What if I'm too broken?" "You're not broken, Evan. You're hurt. There's a difference. Broken means beyond repair. Hurt means you need time and care and support to heal. And healing is always possible, even when it doesn't feel like it." They talked for another 30 minutes about practical things: how often he should come to therapy, what to do when the grief felt overwhelming, ways to be more present with Mia. Rebecca gave him homework: write a letter to Sarah that he'd never send, telling her everything he wished he'd said. Keep a journal of moments when he felt present versus moments when he felt like he was just going through the motions. Practice sitting with uncomfortable emotions for 5 minutes instead of immediately trying to escape them through work. When the session ended, Evan felt hollowed out but somehow lighter, like something toxic had been drained from him. He scheduled his next appointment for the following week and walked out into the late afternoon sunshine feeling unsteady but not destroyed. His phone had 3 missed calls from Natalie. He called her back from his car. "How did it go?" she asked without preamble. "It was hard. Really hard." Evan leaned his head back against the seat. "But I think it helped. Maybe. I don't know." "That's okay. You don't have to know yet." He could hear the relief in her voice. "What matters is that you went, that you tried." "She gave me homework," he said, and something about that felt absurd enough to make him almost laugh. Grief homework. "Are you going to do it?" Evan thought about the letter he was supposed to write, about all the things he'd never said to Sarah because he'd thought there would be more time. The idea of putting those words on paper felt impossible. But then, 2 days ago, the idea of crying in a therapist's office had felt impossible too. "Yeah," he said, "I'm going to try." "Good. Listen, I know I've been pushing you hard this week, checking in constantly, mandating changes, basically reorganizing your entire life without asking permission. You think?" The words came out sharper than he intended, but Natalie just laughed. "Fair point, but I want you to know that I'm not doing this because I think you're weak or incapable. I'm doing it because I see what you can't see yet, that you're worth saving, that your life, your happiness, your health, they matter. Not just for Mia's sake, but for your own." Evan's throat tightened. "Thank you. For caring. For not looking away when it would have been easier. That's what friends do." The word hit him with unexpected force. Friends. When had Natalie become more than just his boss? When had this become something more than a professional relationship? "I should go pick up Mia," he said, needing to end the call before the emotion became overwhelming. "Okay? But Evan, one more thing. Yeah? I'm proud of you for going to therapy, for trying. I know it doesn't feel like much, but it's everything." After they hung up, Evan sat in his car for another few minutes, processing the conversation, the therapy session, the entire surreal week. Then he drove to the daycare, where Mia greeted him with her usual enthusiasm. "Daddy, can we go to the playground?" Before, he would have said no. Too tired, too much to do. But now, remembering Rebecca's words about being present, remembering Natalie's insistence that his life mattered beyond productivity, he smiled. "Absolutely." They spent an hour at the playground. Mia climbed on the jungle gym while Evan pushed her on the swings and caught her at the bottom of the slide. She laughed and played and was so purely, completely happy that it made his chest ache. How many afternoons like this had he missed? How many moments of joy had he sacrificed on the altar of productivity and control? As the sun began to set and other families started to leave, Mia came and sat next to him on the bench, leaning against his side. "Daddy, are you okay?" she asked. The question surprised him. "What do you mean, Bug?" "You've been different this week, happier, but also sadder. I don't know." She frowned, trying to find the right words. Like, "You're more here." Out of the mouths of children. Evan put his arm around her and pulled her close. "I've been sad, yeah, missing Mama. But I'm trying to be better at showing you when I'm sad instead of pretending I'm not. Mrs. Patterson at daycare says it's okay to be sad sometimes. She says feelings are like the weather. They change, and you just have to wait for them to pass." Mrs. Patterson is very smart. Mia was quiet for a moment, then said, "I'm sad sometimes too. About Mama." Evan's heart broke and mended simultaneously. "I know, Bug, and that's okay. You can always tell me when you're sad. We can be sad together." "Really?" "Really." She thought about this, then nodded solemnly. "Okay, I'll tell you next time." They sat together in comfortable silence while the sky turned orange and pink, and Evan felt something shift inside him. Not fixed, not healed, but different. More honest, more real. That night after Mia was in bed, Evan sat at his kitchen table with a blank piece of paper in front of him. The letter to Sarah. His grief homework. He stared at the empty page for 15 minutes before finally picking up the pen. "Dear Sarah," he wrote, and then the words came in a flood. He wrote about the day she died, about holding her hand as her breathing slowed and stopped, about the terrible silence that had followed. He wrote about the funeral, about carrying Mia through her grief while drowning in his own. He wrote about the 18 months since, about the mistakes he'd made, the moments he'd missed, the way he'd tried to honor her memory by working himself to death. He wrote about Natalie showing up at his apartment and forcing him to see what he'd been refusing to acknowledge. He wrote about therapy, about crying in front of a stranger, about how terrifying it was to let go of control. He wrote about Mia, about pancakes and playgrounds and the sound of her laughter that he'd almost forgotten. "I'm so angry at you," he wrote, the words appearing on the page before he could stop them. "I'm angry that you left, that you got sick, that our time together was so short. I'm angry that Mia has to grow up without you. I'm angry that I have to do this alone. And I'm angry at myself for being angry, because I know it wasn't your choice, and you would have stayed if you could have." His hand was shaking, tears falling on the paper and blurring the ink, but he kept writing. "But I also love you. I love you so much it still hurts to breathe sometimes. I love the way you made me laugh, the way you saw the best in everyone, the way you could make Mia giggle with just a look. I love every memory we made, every moment we shared, every piece of my life that you touched. And I'm trying to learn how to carry that love without letting it destroy me." He wrote for an hour, filling 3 pages with everything he'd been holding inside for 18 months. And when he finally set down the pen, exhausted and wrung out, he felt something release in his chest. Not the grief itself, but the desperate grip he'd been maintaining on it, the refusal to let it be what it was. The next morning was Saturday, and for the first time in months, Evan didn't wake up thinking about work. He made breakfast with Mia, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, but eaten together at the table instead of rushed while standing at the counter. They spent the morning at the farmer's market, walking slowly through the stalls, buying fresh fruit and vegetables and a small bouquet of flowers that Mia insisted on getting. "Who are the flowers for?" Evan asked. "Mama," Mia said simply. "Can we bring them to her?" Evan's breath caught. They hadn't been to the cemetery in months. He'd been avoiding it, unable to face the physical reminder of what he'd lost. But looking down at Mia's hopeful face, at the flowers clutched in her small hands, he found himself nodding. "Yeah, Bug, we can do that." The cemetery was quiet on Saturday morning, peaceful in a way that felt almost comforting. They walked together to Sarah's grave, and Evan was surprised to find that being there didn't break him the way he'd feared it would. It hurt. Of course it hurt. But it was a clean pain, honest and real, instead of the festering wound he'd been carrying. Mia placed the flowers carefully at the base of the headstone, then stood back and looked at Evan. "Can we talk to her?" "Of course." So they did. Mia told Sarah about school, about her friends, about the book they were reading at bedtime. Evan told her about work, about Natalie, about the therapy and the changes he was trying to make. It felt absurd and necessary all at once, this conversation with someone who couldn't answer back. When they were ready to leave, Mia took Evan's hand and said, "I think Mama would be proud of you, Daddy, for trying to be happy again." Evan had to stop walking, the emotion too overwhelming to navigate while moving. He knelt down so he was eye level with his daughter. "I think she'd be proud of you too, Bug. You're so brave, so strong, so much like her." Mia hugged him tight, and they stayed like that for a long moment in the middle of the cemetery path, holding each other while the world moved around them. On Monday, Evan arrived at work at 8:30 instead of 7. He worked through his morning, taking a real lunch break at noon and eating outside in the sunshine. He left at 6, ignoring the voice in his head that screamed about all the things left undone. Tuesday was the same. Wednesday too. By Thursday, the panic about leaving on time had faded to a dull anxiety that he could mostly ignore. His colleagues adjusted to his new schedule. Projects continued without him needing to micromanage every detail. The world, it turned out, kept spinning even when he wasn't trying to control every aspect of it. Thursday afternoon, Natalie called him up to her office. "How are you doing?" she asked when he sat down. "Better. Not fixed, but better." Evan managed a small smile. "I went to the cemetery this weekend with Mia. First time in months." "How was that?" "Hard, but good." "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense." Natalie pulled a folder from her desk and slid it across to him. "I wanted to talk to you about your promotion. We're making the official announcement tomorrow at the staff meeting, but before we do, I need to know if you're ready for it." Evan opened the folder and scanned the details. Senior Director of Strategic Development, a significant raise, expanded responsibilities, a leadership role on the executive team. A month ago, this would have been everything he wanted. Now looking at it, he felt uncertain. "Can I ask you something honestly?" he said. "Always. Are you offering me this because I earned it, or because you feel sorry for me?" Natalie's expression hardened slightly. "I would never insult you like that, Evan. You earned this promotion through exceptional work. Your value to this company has nothing to do with your personal struggles, and everything to do with your skills, your dedication, and your leadership potential." The certainty in her voice settled something in him. "Okay, then yes, I'm ready." "Good, because I'm going to need you at your best for what's coming. We're expanding into new markets, taking on larger clients, building something significant, and I want you to be part of that. Not the version of you that was working himself to death, but the version that's present, engaged, and actually capable of sustainable excellence." They spent the next 20 minutes discussing the details of the new role, the projects he'd be leading, the team he'd be building. And for the first time in 18 months, Evan felt genuine excitement about work instead of just grim determination to survive it. As he stood to leave, Natalie said, "Evan, one more thing." "Yeah? I'm having a dinner party next Saturday. Nothing formal, just some friends. I'd like you to come. Bring Mia if you can't find a sitter. I'd enjoy spending time with you both outside of work." The invitation caught him off guard. Friends. The word she'd used on the phone. The relationship that had somehow developed between them over the past 2 weeks of intensive intervention and forced vulnerability. "I'd like that," he said. "We both would." "Good. I'll text you the details." Walking back to his office, Evan felt something unfamiliar stirring in his chest. Not quite happiness. He wasn't ready for that yet. But maybe hope. Maybe the beginning of believing that life could be more than just survival. That evening, he sat for his second therapy session with Rebecca. He told her about the cemetery visit, about the letter he'd written to Sarah, about the small changes that were starting to feel less terrifying. "You're doing the work," Rebecca said, and there was genuine pride in her voice. "Real difficult work. How does it feel?" "Exhausting. Overwhelming. But also," he paused, searching for the right word, "necessary. Like I've been holding my breath for 18 months and I'm finally learning how to breathe again." That's a perfect description of early grief work. Your nervous system has been in survival mode for so long that returning to normal function feels strange. But strange isn't bad. It's just different. They talked about the dinner party invitation, about Evan's fear of forming new connections when he was still grieving old ones. They talked about the promotion and whether he could handle increased responsibility while also maintaining the boundaries he was trying to establish. They talked about Mia and how to help her process her own grief while he was processing his. By the end of the session, Evan's head was spinning, but it was the good kind of spinning, the kind that came from growth instead of chaos. Friday's staff meeting came with all the anxiety Evan had expected. Standing at the front of the room while Natalie announced his promotion, feeling all eyes on him, remembering the ceremony he'd missed. It took everything he had to smile and accept the congratulations that followed. But when Marcus clapped him on the shoulder and said, "About damn time, man," when Sarah Chen hugged him and said she couldn't wait to work on his team, when even people he barely knew stopped by his office to offer good wishes, something loosened in him. These people cared. They weren't just colleagues, they were a community he'd been holding at arm's length for fear of appearing weak. That afternoon, as he was packing up to leave at 6, his phone rang. Unknown number. He almost didn't answer, but something made him pick up. "Mr. Brooks? This is Linda Garrett from Mia's school." His heart immediately seized. "Is Mia okay?" "She's fine, I promise, but we had a situation today, and I thought you should know. Mia had a bit of a breakdown during quiet time. She was crying about missing her mother. Her teacher handled it beautifully, but Mia asked if we could call you." Evan was already grabbing his keys, heading for the door. "I'm on my way." He made it to the school in 12 minutes. Mia was waiting in the office with the school counselor, her face blotchy from crying, her stuffed elephant clutched to her chest. When she saw him, her face crumpled. "Daddy!" He scooped her up, holding her tight while she cried against his shoulder. The counselor quietly explained that Mia had been talking with friends about their mothers, and the conversation had triggered a wave of grief that she couldn't control. "It's completely normal," the counselor assured him. "And honestly, it's healthy that she felt safe enough to express it instead of bottling it up." Evan thanked her and carried Mia out to the car. He buckled her in, then climbed into the driver's seat and just sat there for a moment. "I miss Mama," Mia said in a small voice. "I know, Bug. I miss her too." "Does it ever stop hurting?" The question broke his heart. He turned around so he could see her face. "I don't think it stops hurting completely, but I think maybe it starts hurting less. And I think we learn how to remember her without it being so sad all the time." "How do we do that?" Evan thought about therapy, about the letter he'd written, about sitting at Sarah's grave and talking to her like she could hear. We talk about her. We remember the good things. We let ourselves be sad when we need to be sad, but we also let ourselves be happy. Because Mama would want us to be happy, right? Mia nodded slowly. She always wanted us to be happy. So we keep trying, and when it gets hard, we help each other. Together? Together. They drove home in comfortable silence, and that evening, instead of rushing through dinner and bedtime, Evan asked Mia if she wanted to look at photo albums. They spent 2 hours on the couch going through pictures of Sarah, laughing at silly photos, crying at beautiful ones, remembering stories and moments that Evan had been too afraid to revisit. And when Mia finally fell asleep that night, it was with a smile on her face instead of tears, surrounded by pictures of the mother she'd lost but would never forget. Evan sat in his living room after she was asleep, feeling the weight of the week settling over him. The intervention, the therapy, the boundaries, the promotion, the dinner party invitation, Mia's breakdown at school, Sarah's grave, the letter, the memories. It was too much and exactly enough all at once. His phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "How was your day?" He smiled despite his exhaustion and typed back, hard. "Good. Both." Her response came immediately. "That's called living. Proud of you." Evan stared at those 3 words, proud of you, and felt something crack open in his chest. When was the last time someone had said that to him? When was the last time he'd believed he deserved to hear it? He set the phone down and closed his eyes, and for the first time in 18 months, when he thought about the future, it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a possibility. Not easy, not painless, but possible. And maybe, just maybe, that was enough. Saturday arrived with unexpected sunshine, the kind of perfect autumn day that made everything feel possible. Evan woke before his alarm and lay in bed listening to the sounds of the city, waking up outside his window, feeling something he hadn't felt in so long he almost didn't recognize it. Anticipation. Natalie's dinner party was tonight. The thought sent a flutter of anxiety through his stomach, but it was manageable anxiety, the normal kind that came with new social situations, not the crushing panic that had become his constant companion. Mia appeared in his doorway, already dressed in mismatched clothes that she'd clearly picked out herself: purple leggings, a striped shirt, and the sparkly shoes that Sarah had bought her for her 5th birthday. "Can we make waffles?" she asked, climbing onto his bed. "We can absolutely make waffles." They spent the morning in easy companionship, the kind that Evan was slowly learning to recognize and cherish. Waffles that were only slightly burned, a walk to the corner store for milk, cartoons on the couch with Mia tucked under his arm. Simple moments that used to slip past him unnoticed, but that now felt precious. At 11, his phone rang. Rebecca, his therapist. "I'm sorry to call on a Saturday," she said, "but I wanted to check in before your dinner party tonight. How are you feeling about it?" They'd spent part of his last session discussing the invitation, unpacking his conflicted feelings about forming new connections while still grieving Sarah. "Nervous," Evan admitted, moving to the kitchen so Mia wouldn't overhear, "but I think it's normal nervous, not breakdown nervous." "That's good. Remember what we talked about. You don't have to be perfect. You don't have to perform being okay. If it gets overwhelming, it's fine to step outside, take a break, even leave early if you need to. What if people ask about Sarah? Then you tell them as much or as little as you're comfortable with. You're allowed to have boundaries, Evan. You're allowed to say, 'I'd rather not talk about that right now.'" The permission settled something in him. "Okay, thank you for calling. Anytime. And Evan, try to have fun tonight. You deserve that." After they hung up, Evan stood in his kitchen thinking about that last sentence. You deserve that. Did he? Was he allowed to enjoy himself at a dinner party while Sarah was dead? Was happiness a betrayal of her memory? But then he thought about what Sarah would say if she were here. She'd tell him he was being ridiculous. She'd tell him that she didn't die so he could spend the rest of his life punishing himself. She'd tell him to go to the party, eat good food, laugh with people, and actually live. The afternoon passed in a blur of normal activities. Evan worked on his therapy homework, the journal Rebecca had assigned where he tracked moments of presence versus autopilot. He was surprised to find that he had more present moments this week than absent ones. Progress, even if it was slow. At 4, he called Mrs. Chen from downstairs to see if she could watch Mia for the evening. He'd considered bringing her like Natalie had suggested, but something told him this first step back into social connection should be taken alone. "Of course, dear," Mrs. Chen said. "Mia can help me make dumplings. She loved that last time." By 6:30, Evan was standing in front of his closet trying to decide what to wear to a casual dinner party at his boss's house. Everything felt wrong. Too formal, too casual, too much like he was trying too hard or not trying enough. He finally settled on dark jeans and a button-down shirt, casual but put together. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself. He'd lost weight over the past 18 months, his face gaunt, dark circles under his eyes. But looking at himself now, he could see small changes. The circles were lighter. His jaw didn't look quite so clenched. There was something in his expression that hadn't been there before. Not happiness exactly, but maybe the possibility of it. Natalie lived in a renovated warehouse loft in the Arts District, the kind of space that probably cost more than Evan would make in 5 years, even with his promotion. He stood outside the building at 7:15, holding a bottle of wine he'd agonized over at the store and trying to convince himself to go inside. A couple walked past him into the building, clearly also heading to the party, and Evan forced himself to follow. 3rd floor. The elevator ride felt interminable. Music and laughter filtered through Natalie's door when he reached it. He raised his hand to knock, then hesitated. What was he doing here? He didn't belong at dinner parties. He belonged at home with Mia, or at work, or in therapy processing his endless grief. He belonged... The door opened. Natalie stood there in jeans and a soft sweater, her hair down instead of pulled back, looking more relaxed than he'd ever seen her. "I thought I heard someone lurking out here," she said with a smile. "Come in before you talk yourself into leaving." She knew him too well already. Evan managed a sheepish smile and stepped inside. The loft was stunning. Exposed brick walls, industrial beams, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the city. But Natalie had made it warm somehow, with soft lighting and comfortable furniture and art that looked like it meant something to her, rather than just filling space. There were maybe a dozen people scattered around the open living area, talking and laughing, drinks in hand. Evan recognized a few faces from work, but most were strangers. "Everyone," Natalie called out, "this is Evan. Be nice to him, or you're all fired." The joke broke the tension. People laughed and called out greetings, and Natalie guided him toward the kitchen where she pressed a beer into his hand. "Breathe," she said quietly. "You look like you're about to pass out." "Just nervous. I haven't been to a social thing," and he couldn't even remember. "Well, you're here now. And look, you're already doing great. You walked through the door. That's the hardest part." A woman approached them, maybe 50, with warm eyes and a bright smile. "You must be Evan. Natalie's told me so much about you. I'm Jennifer, her sister." The sister who'd staged the intervention 7 years ago. Evan shook her hand, feeling the significance of the introduction. "It's good to meet you," he said. "Likewise. And between you and me, I'm glad Natalie's finally found someone else to boss around. She's been insufferable without a project." "I'm standing right here," Natalie protested, but she was smiling. Jennifer winked at Evan and drifted away, and Natalie rolled her eyes. "She's the worst. I love her desperately." The evening unfolded in ways Evan hadn't expected. He talked with Marcus from work and his husband about their recent trip to Japan. He listened to Jennifer tell embarrassing stories about Natalie's childhood. He met Thomas, a professor who taught literature and who spent 20 minutes enthusiastically explaining the themes in a book Evan had never read but found himself interested in. Dinner was served buffet style, everyone helping themselves and settling in various clusters around the loft. Evan ended up on the couch next to a woman named Diane, who ran a nonprofit for youth mentorship. She asked what he did, and he told her about his work, his promotion, carefully leaving out the part about nearly working himself to death. "And do you have family?" she asked. The question stopped him. Here it was, the moment he'd been dreading. He could deflect, change the subject, give the minimum information necessary, but something Rebecca had said echoed in his mind. "You're allowed to be honest." "I have a daughter, Mia. She's 6. He paused, then made himself continue. "My wife passed away 18 months ago." Diane's expression filled with genuine compassion. "I'm so sorry. That must be incredibly difficult." "It has been, but we're managing, learning how to keep going. That takes tremendous courage." Evan didn't know what to say to that, so he just nodded. But Diane didn't push, didn't ask probing questions, just acknowledged his loss and then gently shifted the conversation to lighter topics. It was exactly what he needed. Around 9, Evan stepped out onto Natalie's balcony for some air. The city spread out below, lights glittering in the darkness. He leaned against the railing and closed his eyes, processing the evening. He'd done it. He'd been to a social event. He'd talked to people. He'd mentioned Sarah without breaking down. Small victories, maybe, but victories nonetheless. The door behind him opened and Natalie joined him at the railing. "You doing okay?" she asked. Yeah, this has been really nice." "You sound surprised." "I guess I am. I didn't think I was ready for something like this, but it's been good. Your friends are wonderful." Natalie was quiet for a moment, looking out at the city. "Can I tell you something? When Daniel died, I stopped seeing people entirely. I convinced myself I was better off alone, that no one could understand what I was going through, that friendship was just another obligation I couldn't handle. It took Jennifer physically dragging me to a dinner party. Literally dragging. I fought her the whole way, before I realized how much I needed connection." "What changed?" "I stopped thinking about friendship as something I had to perform and started thinking about it as something that could sustain me. I let people see me messy and broken. And you know what? They didn't run away. They sat with me in it." Evan thought about the evening, about the easy conversations, the lack of judgment, the way people had accepted his presence without demanding explanations. "Thank you," he said, "for inviting me. For all of this." "You're welcome. But Evan, I didn't do this just for you. I genuinely enjoy your company. You're interesting and thoughtful and kind. I wanted you here because I like having you around, not because I'm trying to fix you." The distinction mattered more than he could express. He wasn't a project. He was a person. Someone worth knowing for his own sake. They stood in comfortable silence for a while, and Evan became aware of how close they were standing, of the warmth of her presence beside him. It had been so long since he'd felt any kind of attraction to anyone that he almost didn't recognize the flutter in his chest for what it was. He immediately felt guilty. Sarah had been dead less than 2 years. Was he allowed to feel this? Was it a betrayal? But looking at Natalie, this woman who'd refused to let him destroy himself, who'd shown up at his door and demanded he choose life, who'd shared her own pain to help him through his, he realized it wasn't about replacing Sarah. It was about allowing himself to feel something other than grief. I should probably head out, he said, suddenly needing distance to process what he was feeling. I told Mrs. Chen I wouldn't be too late. Of course. But Evan, I'm glad you came. Really glad. He gathered his things and said his goodbyes, accepting warm wishes from people who'd been strangers 3 hours ago, but who now felt like the beginning of something. Community, maybe. Connection. The drive home was quiet, just him and his thoughts and the city lights blurring past. When he picked up Mia from Mrs. Chen's apartment, she was covered in flour and beaming. Daddy, we made so many dumplings. Mrs. Chen said I'm a natural. I bet you are, Bug. He thanked Mrs. Chen profusely and carried his sleepy daughter upstairs. Getting Mia ready for bed, Evan felt something settle in his chest. Peace, maybe. Or at least the absence of constant panic. The evening had been good. He'd survived it. No, more than survived. He'd enjoyed it. Did you have fun at your party? Mia asked as he tucked her in. I did, actually. Was Ms. Natalie there? It was at her house. Mia considered this with her serious expression. I like Ms. Natalie. She came to visit me at daycare last week. Evan froze. She what? On Wednesday. She said she wanted to meet me. We drew pictures together. Mia yawned. She's nice. After Mia fell asleep, Evan pulled out his phone and texted Natalie. Mia just told me you visited her at daycare? The response came quickly. Was that overstepping? I wanted to meet her and I thought it would be less weird than just showing up at your apartment again. She's wonderful, by the way, so smart and creative. Evan stared at the message, processing the fact that Natalie had taken time out of her undoubtedly busy schedule to visit his daughter. Not for work reasons, not because she had to, just because she wanted to. Not overstepping, he typed back, just unexpected. Thank you for being so kind to her. She makes it easy. Good night, Evan. Sleep well. He set the phone down and sat in his quiet apartment, thinking about the past few weeks. The intervention, the therapy, the boundaries, the grief work. And now this. Connection with people who seemed to genuinely care about him, who saw him as more than just a widower or an employee or a father struggling to hold it together. The weeks that followed developed a rhythm that felt almost sustainable. Evan went to therapy every Friday, showing up even when he didn't feel like it, even when the sessions left him raw and exhausted. He talked about Sarah, about the guilt he felt for moments when he forgot to be sad, about his fears that Mia would forget her mother. Memory isn't fixed, Rebecca told him during one session. You're not going to forget Sarah, and neither will Mia, but the way you remember her will change. The sharp edges of grief will soften. That's not betrayal, that's healing. At work, the new boundaries held despite his occasional urges to slip back into old patterns. Natalie checked in regularly, sometimes with a casual text asking how he was doing, sometimes with pointed questions about whether he'd left on time or taken his lunch break. It should have felt intrusive, but instead it felt like someone cared enough to hold him accountable to his own well-being. His new role as senior director came with challenges, but Evan found he could handle them better now that he wasn't running on empty. He built a strong team, delegated effectively, and discovered that trusting other people didn't mean everything would fall apart. Marcus became something like a friend, the kind Evan hadn't had since college. They started having lunch together once a week, conversations that ranged from work strategy to Marcus's husband's attempts to teach him to cook to Evan's therapy homework. Marcus never pushed, never demanded more than Evan could give, but his steady presence was a reminder that connection didn't have to be complicated. At home, Evan learned to be present. He and Mia established new routines, cooking dinner together most nights, reading longer chapter books at bedtime, weekend adventures to museums or parks or the library. They talked about Sarah often, sharing memories without letting them become painful. Mia kept a small photo album by her bed and sometimes told Evan stories about her day as if Sarah was still there to hear them. "Is that weird?" she asked one night. "That I still talk to Mama sometimes?" "Not weird at all, Bug. I think she'd like that." "Do you talk to her?" Evan thought about the letter he'd written, about the conversations he sometimes had in his head when he was driving or lying awake at night. "Yeah, I do." "What do you tell her?" "I tell her about you mostly, about how smart you are, how brave, how much you're growing. I think she'd be really proud of you." Mia smiled and snuggled deeper under her covers. "I think she'd be proud of you too, Daddy." 6 weeks after Natalie's first dinner party, she invited him to another one. This time, Evan brought Mia. "Are you sure?" he'd asked when Natalie extended the invitation. A 6-year-old at an adult dinner party seems like a recipe for chaos. "I'm sure. And chaos is underrated." Mia was nervous getting ready, changing outfits 3 times before settling on her favorite purple dress. "What if they don't like me?" she asked. "Bug, you're the most likable person I know. They're going to love you." He was right. Mia charmed everyone within the first 15 minutes, showing Jennifer her collection of hair ribbons, telling Thomas about the book they were reading together, helping in the kitchen with an enthusiasm that made Natalie laugh. Watching his daughter interact with these people, watching her be happy and confident and completely herself, Evan felt something unlock in his chest. This was what he wanted for her, not just survival, but joy. Not just getting by, but actually living. Later in the evening, while Mia was absorbed in a puzzle with Jennifer, Natalie pulled Evan aside. "Can we talk for a minute?" They went to her home office, a smaller room off the main living area lined with bookshelves and family photos. Natalie closed the door and leaned against her desk, suddenly looking uncertain in a way he'd rarely seen. "I need to be honest with you about something," she said. Evan's stomach dropped. "Okay." "When I first intervened in your life, when I showed up at your apartment and basically bulldozed my way into forcing you to get help, I told myself I was doing it purely out of concern, because I'd been where you were, and I didn't want to watch someone else go through that." "That's not true?" "No, it is true, but it's not the whole truth." She met his eyes, and he saw a vulnerability there that caught him off guard. "The truth is that I care about you, Evan. Not just as an employee or even as a friend. I care about you in a way that's probably inappropriate given that I'm your boss, and you're still processing tremendous grief." Evan's heart was suddenly pounding. "Natalie, please let me finish. I'm not telling you this because I expect anything. I'm telling you because I believe in being honest, and hiding this felt dishonest. You've been through hell. You're still healing. The last thing you need is complicated feelings about your boss. So I wanted to be upfront so you can tell me if this is a problem, if my being around is making things harder." Evan stared at her, processing what she'd just said. The truth was, he'd been aware of his own feelings for weeks now. The way his pulse quickened when he saw her name on his phone. The way he looked forward to their check-ins. The way he'd found himself thinking about her at random moments throughout the day. But he'd pushed those feelings down, convinced himself they were just gratitude or transference, or some other psychological phenomenon that didn't mean what it felt like. "It's not a problem," he said quietly. "Actually, I care about you too, which terrifies me if I'm being honest, because I don't know if I'm ready. I don't know if it's too soon, or if I'm betraying Sarah's memory, or if I'm just latching onto the person who saved me when I was drowning." Natalie's expression softened. "Those are all valid questions, and I don't have answers for them. Neither of us do. So what do we do? We're honest. We take it slow. We don't rush into anything just because feelings exist. We keep doing the work. Therapy, healing, building sustainable lives. And if something develops between us organically, something real and not just born from crisis, then we'll deal with it when we get there." Evan nodded, relief washing through him. No pressure, no expectations, just honesty and the space to figure things out. "I can do that," he said. They stood there for a moment, the air between them charged with possibility and uncertainty in equal measure. Then Natalie smiled. "We should get back before Jennifer starts telling Mia embarrassing stories about me." "Too late for that," Evan said, and they both laughed. The rest of the evening passed in comfortable warmth. Evan watched Mia play, watched Natalie interact with her friends, and occasionally meet his eyes across the room with a small smile. It felt like standing at the beginning of something, the shape of it still unclear but no longer quite so terrifying. On the drive home, Mia was quiet until they were almost at their apartment. "Daddy?" she said. "Do you like Miss Natalie?" Evan glanced at her in the rear-view mirror. "I do, yeah. She's a good friend." "Do you like her?" He couldn't help but smile at the phrasing. "Maybe. Is that okay with you?" Mia thought about this seriously. "I think Mama would want you to be happy, and Ms. Natalie makes you smile, so yeah, it's okay." The simple wisdom of children. Evan felt his throat tighten with emotion. "Thank you, Bug. That means a lot." That night, after Mia was asleep, Evan pulled out the letter he'd written to Sarah weeks ago. He'd been carrying it with him, not sure what to do with it. Rebecca had suggested he could burn it, bury it, keep it, whatever felt right. He read through it again, feeling the pain of those words, but also recognizing how much had changed since he'd written them. He was still grieving. He would always grieve, but the grief no longer consumed every moment. It had become something he carried alongside joy, alongside hope, alongside the possibility of new connection. He found himself writing a second letter, this one shorter. "Dear Sarah, I'm learning to live again. Really live, not just survive. It's terrifying and painful, and sometimes I feel guilty for every moment of happiness, but I think you'd want this for me. I think you'd want me to let people in, to let myself feel things, to give Mia a father who's present and whole. I love you. I'll always love you. But I'm starting to understand that loving you and living fully aren't mutually exclusive. I hope that's okay." He folded both letters together and placed them in the box where he kept Sarah's things. Her wedding ring, the last birthday card she'd given him, photographs from their life together. They belonged there, part of his history, part of what made him who he was. But they didn't have to define his entire future. The next morning was Sunday, and Evan woke to find Mia already up, making what she clearly thought was breakfast in bed. A bowl of cereal with way too much milk, a banana, and a handful of cookies she'd clearly stolen from the pantry. "What's all this?" he asked, sitting up. "I wanted to make you breakfast like you make me breakfast," she said proudly. Evan's heart swelled. "Well, this is perfect. Thank you, Bug." They ate together in his bed, cookies and all, making a mess of the sheets and laughing about it. Simple joy, uncomplicated happiness. The kind of moment that used to slip past him, but that he now recognized as exactly what life was supposed to be about. Later, they went to the park, then the library, then home to cook dinner together. Spaghetti that Mia insisted on helping with, resulting in sauce splattered on both of them and the kitchen looking like a crime scene. It was messy and chaotic and imperfect. It was also the best day Evan had had in 18 months. That night, after bath time and stories and goodnight kisses, Evan sat in his living room with a cup of tea and his therapy journal. Under moments of presence, he wrote about the entire day. Under moments of autopilot, he couldn't think of a single one. His phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. "How was your day?" "Really good," he typed back. "Actually, really good." "I'm glad. Sleep well, Evan." He set the phone down and closed his eyes, feeling something that had been absent for so long he'd almost forgotten what it felt like. Contentment. Not happiness yet. He wasn't sure he was ready for that. But contentment. Peace. The sense that maybe, just maybe, he was going to be okay. He thought about Sarah, about the life they'd had together, about everything he'd lost. The grief was still there, would always be there, but it had shifted from a crushing weight to something more like a tender scar, painful when touched but no longer actively bleeding. And alongside the grief was something new. Hope. Connection. The possibility of a future that included joy alongside sadness, new love alongside old memories, moving forward while still honoring the past. It was complicated and messy and uncertain. It was also, Evan was beginning to realize, exactly what healing looked like. 3 months had passed since that Sunday of spaghetti sauce and simple joy, and Evan could mark the passage of time now not by deadlines or projects, but by small transformations. The way Mia laughed more easily, the way his reflection in the mirror looked less haunted, the way Sunday mornings had become sacred, lazy breakfasts and farmers markets, and the deliberate choice to simply be present. It was early December now, the city draped in holiday lights that Evan could actually appreciate instead of just rushing past. He stood in his office on a Friday afternoon, looking out at the skyline as snow began to fall in soft, lazy flakes. His desk was clear, actually clear, not just pushed aside until later clear. Projects completed, emails answered, work done at a sustainable pace by a person who'd learned the difference between dedication and self-destruction. His phone buzzed. Natalie. "My office in 10. There's something I want to run by you." He smiled at the message, feeling that familiar flutter that had become a constant companion over the past months. They'd been taking it slow like they'd promised, but slow didn't mean stagnant. Coffee meetings that ran long, conversations that stretched into evenings, moments when their hands would brush and neither would pull away immediately. They hadn't defined what they were doing, hadn't put labels on it, but something was growing between them, careful and intentional and real. Evan grabbed his jacket and headed upstairs. Natalie's assistant waved him through, and he found her standing by her window, looking out at the same snowfall. "It's beautiful," she said without turning around. "It is." He moved to stand beside her, close enough that he could smell her perfume, that subtle scent he'd come to associate with comfort and challenge in equal measure. "The annual charity gala is next Saturday," she said, "the one the company sponsors every year. Black tie, extremely boring speeches, overpriced rubber chicken. Sounds delightful." She turned to face him, and there was something in her expression that made his pulse quicken. Nervousness, maybe. Hope. "I need a date," she said. "And before you ask, yes, I could go alone. I have for the past 7 years. But I don't want to this time. I want to go with you, if you're ready, if it's not too much." Evan's heart was pounding now. A public appearance together. At a company event where everyone would see them, where questions would be raised and assumptions made. It was a line they hadn't crossed yet, a declaration of something more than friendship. "What about work?" he asked. "The optics of the CEO dating someone who reports to her?" "You don't report directly to me. And I've already spoken with HR about potential conflicts of interest. They've approved it as long as we maintain professional boundaries at work and disclose the relationship." She paused. "But only if you want to. Only if you're ready for people to know." Evan thought about Sarah, about the guilt that still occasionally surfaced when he allowed himself to feel happy. But he also thought about what Rebecca had said in their last session. You're allowed to have a life after loss. You're allowed to love again. It doesn't diminish what you had. It honors it by showing you still have the capacity to open your heart. "I'd like that," he said. "Going with you. Being your date. All of it." Natalie's face lit up with a smile that made everything worth it. "Yeah? Yeah? But I should probably tell you, I haven't been to a black tie event in years. I'm not sure I even own a tux anymore." "We'll figure it out." She reached out and took his hand, and the simple contact sent warmth spreading through his chest. "Thank you, Evan, for being willing to take this step. Thank you for being patient while I figured out if I could." That evening, Evan told Mia about the gala. She was sitting at the kitchen table working on homework, her tongue stuck out in concentration as she carefully formed letters. "So I need to tell you something," he said, sitting down across from her. She looked up, immediately alert. "What's wrong?" "Nothing's wrong. Actually, something's right. Ms. Natalie asked me to go to a fancy party with her next weekend, as her date." Mia set down her pencil. "Like a date? Like boyfriend-girlfriend?" "Maybe. We're taking things slow, but yeah, something like that." "Do you love her?" The question stopped him. Did he? It felt too soon to use that word, too heavy after everything. But when he thought about Natalie, about her strength and her kindness, about the way she'd refused to let him destroy himself, about how she made him want to be better, he felt something that might be the beginning of love. "I care about her a lot," he said carefully. "And I think maybe I could love her, if that's okay with you." Mia was quiet for a long moment, and Evan's heart clenched. This was the moment that mattered most. Mia's blessing, her comfort, her sense that she wasn't being replaced or forgotten. "I miss Mama every day," Mia said finally, her voice small. "Sometimes I forget what her voice sounded like, and that makes me so sad." Evan reached across the table and took her hand. I know, Bug, me too. But I don't think Mama would want you to be alone forever. And Ms. Natalie is nice. She came to my school concert last week even though you couldn't because of work. She sat with Mrs. Chen and they both clapped really loud when I sang my solo. Evan hadn't known that. The concert had been during a client meeting he couldn't reschedule, and he'd felt terrible about missing it, but Natalie had gone, without telling him, just because she cared. So it's okay? He asked. If I go to this party with her, if we maybe become more than friends? Mia nodded seriously. It's okay, but Daddy. Yeah? You have to promise that even if you love Miss Natalie, you won't forget about Mama. That we'll still talk about her and remember her and keep her pictures up. Evan felt tears burning behind his eyes. I promise, Bug. Nothing and no one could ever make me forget your Mama. She's part of who we are, and that will never change. Okay then, you should go to the party. But you need to rent a tux because yours from when you married Mama doesn't fit anymore. You're too skinny now. The observation was so matter-of-fact and so perfectly Mia that Evan had to laugh through his tears. You're absolutely right. I'll rent one. The next week passed in a blur of preparation and growing anticipation. Evan rented a tux that actually fit. He told Marcus about the gala, about Natalie, about the decision to go public with whatever they were building together. About damn time, Marcus said, clapping him on the shoulder. We've all seen the way you two look at each other. It's been painful watching you both pretend there's nothing there. We weren't pretending exactly, just being careful. Careful is good, but at some point you have to actually jump. Looks like you're ready to jump. Evan thought about that. Was he jumping? It felt more like stepping carefully onto a bridge he'd been building for months, testing each plank to make sure it would hold. Friday afternoon, he had his regular therapy session with Rebecca. So the gala is tomorrow, she said. How are you feeling? Nervous, excited, guilty, hopeful, all of it at once. Tell me about the guilt. Evan leaned back in his chair, considering. It's not as sharp as it used to be. Not that overwhelming sense that I'm betraying Sarah by being happy, but it's still there. This little voice that says it's too soon, that I should wait longer, that moving on means leaving her behind. And what do you say back to that voice? I remind myself that Sarah would want me to be happy, that loving someone new doesn't erase what I had with her, that I'm allowed to have a future even though she doesn't get one. He paused. It's getting easier to believe that. Most days. Rebecca nodded approvingly. That's significant growth, Evan. 3 months ago, you couldn't even say her name without breaking down. Now you're actively challenging the guilt and building something new while honoring what you lost. That's exactly what healing looks like. It doesn't feel like enough sometimes, like I should be further along. Grief doesn't have a timeline. You're exactly where you need to be. And Evan? She smiled gently. I think you're ready for this. For Natalie, for the gala, for whatever comes next. You've done the work. You've built a foundation. Now you get to live on it. Saturday arrived with clear skies and cold air that made the city sparkle. Evan spent the morning with Mia, the two of them making cookies and watching movies, storing up presents before the evening's event. Jennifer had offered to watch Mia for the night, and around 4 they drove over to Natalie's loft where Jennifer was already setting up for what looked like an elaborate girls' night. We're going to have so much fun, Jennifer told Mia. I have every Disney movie ever made and enough junk food to feed an army. Mia hugged Evan tight before he left. Have fun at your party, Daddy. You look very handsome. Thank you, Bug. Be good for Ms. Jennifer. She'll be perfect, Jennifer said, then caught Evan's arm as he turned to go. Take care of my sister tonight. She's more nervous than she's letting on. The vulnerability in that statement, the idea that Natalie, who always seemed so composed and certain, was nervous about tonight, made something tender bloom in Evan's chest. He drove home to change, taking his time with the tux, making sure everything was perfect. In the mirror, he barely recognized himself, not because of the formal clothes, but because of the expression on his face. He looked like someone who was allowing himself to hope, someone who was choosing to live instead of just survive. The gala was at the Grand Ballroom downtown, the kind of venue that dripped old money and careful elegance. Evan arrived early, his stomach a knot of nerves, and found Natalie waiting in the lobby. She took his breath away. She wore a deep blue gown that somehow managed to be both elegant and bold, her hair swept up, minimal jewelry that caught the light. But it was her expression when she saw him that made his heart stop, pure, unguarded joy. "Hi," she said, and there was something almost shy in her voice. "Hi yourself. You look—" Words failed him. "Stunning doesn't even begin to cover it. You clean up pretty well yourself." She moved closer, and Evan caught that familiar scent of her perfume. "Thank you for being here, for doing this with me. Thank you for asking me." They stood there for a moment, the noise of the arriving guests fading into background, just looking at each other. Then Natalie held out her hand, and Evan took it, their fingers lacing together with the ease of something that had been inevitable all along. The ballroom was a sea of tuxedos and evening gowns, round tables draped in white, a stage at the front for speeches and awards. Evan recognized colleagues from work, clients, board members, all the various players in Hale Industries' ecosystem. And he saw the moment when people noticed him and Natalie arriving together, saw the surprise and speculation in their expressions. "Everyone's staring," he murmured. "Let them. I'm tired of hiding what I feel." Natalie squeezed his hand. "But if this is too much, if you need to—" "I'm okay." Nervous, but okay. They found their table, and Evan was relieved to see Marcus and his husband already seated there, along with a few other colleagues he knew and liked. The conversations flowed easily, helped by champagne and the general festive atmosphere. People congratulated Evan on his promotion, asked about Mia, made polite small talk about the holidays. Only Marcus leaned in and whispered, "So you two finally figured it out, huh?" "Working on it," Evan whispered back. "Good. Life's too short to waste time being careful." The words hit harder than Marcus probably intended. Life was too short. Sarah's death had taught him that with devastating clarity. Every day was precious, every moment of connection valuable. Wasting time on fear or guilt or excessive caution didn't honor her memory, it squandered the life she no longer had. Dinner was served, and Evan found himself genuinely enjoying the evening. The food was actually good, the speeches mercifully brief, the charity's work genuinely impressive. But more than that, he was present, not thinking about work or emails or what he should be doing instead, just here in this moment with this woman beside him. After dinner, the music started, a live band playing standards from decades past. Couples moved to the dance floor, and Natalie turned to him with a question in her eyes. "I should warn you," Evan said, "I'm a terrible dancer." "Good thing I'm excellent at leading." She stood and held out her hand. "Dance with me?" He let her pull him onto the floor, and she was right. She was an excellent leader. She guided him through the steps with patience and humor, and gradually Evan stopped worrying about his feet and just moved with her. "This is nice," she said softly, close to his ear. "Being here with you, not hiding anymore. It is nice. Really nice." He paused, then made himself voice what he'd been thinking all week. "I'm still scared sometimes, that I'm not ready, that I'll mess this up, that moving forward with you means betraying what I had with Sarah." Natalie pulled back slightly so she could meet his eyes. "Those fears don't make you unready, Evan. They make you human and honest. I'd be more worried if you weren't scared." "Are you? Scared?" "Terrified. I haven't let anyone close since Daniel died. Haven't wanted to risk that kind of loss again. But you—" She smiled, and it was tender and vulnerable. "You make me want to be brave. You showed up at my apartment and basically saved my life. I think you've got brave covered. That was different. That was swooping in to fix someone else's problem. This is risking my own heart. Much scarier." The song changed to something slower, more intimate, and they moved closer together. Evan was aware of every point of contact, her hand in his, her other hand on his shoulder, the way she fit against him like something inevitable. "Can I tell you something?" he said quietly. "Anything. I think I'm falling for you. Maybe already have fallen. And that terrifies me because I don't know if I'm supposed to be capable of this so soon after losing Sarah. But when I'm with you, I feel like myself again. Not the broken version or the surviving version, but the version who remembers what joy feels like." Natalie's eyes shimmered with tears. "Evan, I'm not asking for anything," he continued quickly. "I'm not trying to rush this or put pressure on what we're building. I just needed you to know that this is real for me. That you're not a rebound or a distraction or me trying to fill a void. You're just you. I'm falling for you too, she said, and her voice was thick with emotion. Have been for months, if I'm honest. Watching you heal, watching you become more yourself, watching you be an incredible father and a brilliant professional and just a genuinely good person. How could I not fall for you? They'd stopped dancing now, just standing in the middle of the floor while other couples moved around them. Evan lifted his hand to cup her face, his thumb brushing her cheek. Is this okay? He asked. Us? Together? More than okay. It's right. It's good. He kissed her before she could finish, gentle and tentative and full of all the hope he'd been too scared to feel until now. She made a small sound of surprise, then melted into him, her arms wrapping around his neck. When they finally broke apart, Evan was aware of people watching, of whispers and smiles, but he didn't care. Let them watch. Let them speculate. This was his life, and he was choosing to live it. Well, Natalie said breathlessly, that's going to be the talk of the office on Monday. Let them talk. My. Evan Brooks not worried about what people think? Who are you, and what have you done with my overly cautious senior director? He learned that life's too short to waste time being scared of being happy. They danced for another hour, talked with colleagues and clients and friends, existed in public as a couple for the first time, and it felt natural, easy, right in a way that made Evan wonder why he'd been so scared in the first place. Near midnight, they slipped out early, driving back to Natalie's loft in comfortable silence. She'd sent Jennifer a text saying she'd pick up Mia in the morning, and now they stood in her living room, the city lights glittering beyond the windows. Coffee? Natalie offered. I should probably go. It's late, and I don't want to... He trailed off, not sure how to finish that sentence. Natalie stepped closer, taking both his hands. I'm not asking you to stay over. I'm not rushing this, but I'm also not ready for tonight to end yet. So coffee and conversation, and we see where it goes. Okay? Okay. They ended up on her couch, shoes kicked off, coffee growing cold on the table as they talked. About the gala, about the work they'd both been doing in therapy, about their hopes for the future, about Sarah and Daniel and the strange gift of grief, how it opened you so completely that when you were finally ready to heal, you could let love in more deeply than before. I went to Sarah's grave last week, Evan said. Took flowers and just sat there talking to her. Told her about you. About how confused I felt, how guilty. And I swear I could hear her in my head telling me I was being an idiot, that she didn't die so I could spend the rest of my life punishing myself. She sounds like she was wonderful. She was. She really was. Evan looked at Natalie, at this woman who'd become so important to him. But so are you, and I'm starting to believe that I can honor what I had with her while also building something new with you. That it's not either or. It's not. Love isn't finite, Evan. You loving me doesn't diminish what you felt for Sarah, and me loving you doesn't mean I've forgotten Daniel. She paused. Because I do. Love you. I know it's soon and we're supposed to be taking it slow, but I need you to know. Evan's heart felt too big for his chest. I love you too. I think I have for a while now. I was just too scared to admit it. They kissed again, deeper this time, and Evan felt something settle into place. This was right. Scary and complicated and messy, but right. He left around 2 a.m, driving home through empty streets with music playing softly and his heart lighter than it had been in years. When he crawled into bed, his phone buzzed with a text from Natalie. Thank you for tonight, for being brave with me. Sleep well. He smiled and typed back, thank you for waiting while I figured out how to be brave. Sweet dreams. Sunday morning, he picked up Mia from Jennifer's, fielding her knowing smiles and pointed questions about how the evening went. It was good, he told her. Really good. I'm glad. You both deserve happiness. On the drive home, Mia chattered about her night, the movies they'd watched, the cookies they'd baked, the fort they'd built in the living room. Evan listened with his full attention, storing away each detail, grateful for this life he'd almost lost to grief and overwork. Did you kiss Miss Natalie? Mia asked suddenly. Evan glanced at her in the rearview mirror. What makes you think that? You look happy. Like, really happy. The kind of happy people look when they kiss someone they like. You're very perceptive, you know that? Is that a yes? Yes. I kissed her. Is that okay? Mia grinned. Yeah, it's okay. Can she come over for dinner sometime? I want to show her my room. I think she'd like that. That afternoon, they invited Natalie over. She arrived with flowers for their kitchen table and a children's book for Mia that she'd apparently been searching for. Jennifer mentioned you'd been looking for this everywhere, she said, handing Mia the book. The sequel to Princess Rocket Builder. Mia's face lit up. I didn't know it existed. Just came out last month. Want to read it together? Evan stood in his kitchen watching Natalie and Mia curl up on the couch with the book, their heads bent together, Mia's small voice reading aloud while Natalie listened with genuine interest. And in that moment, Evan felt something he thought he'd lost forever. Complete, uncomplicated joy. Not joy that ignored the past or pretended grief didn't exist, but joy that acknowledged the pain and chose to exist alongside it. Joy that honored Sarah's memory by showing that the love she'd given him hadn't died with her. It had taught him how to love again. Later, after Natalie had gone home and Mia was in bed, Evan stood in his kitchen. The same kitchen where his life had fallen apart 3 months ago when Natalie knocked on his door. Everything looked the same. The same worn counters, the same mismatched chairs, the same refrigerator covered in Mia's artwork. But everything was different. He was different. The man who'd opened that door at 9:47 p.m. on that Tuesday night had been drowning, desperately treading water and calling it swimming. He'd been so focused on survival that he'd forgotten what it meant to actually live. But the man standing here now knew the difference. His phone buzzed. Another text from Natalie. Mia showed me the photo album she keeps by her bed, the pictures of Sarah. Thank you for raising such a beautiful, emotionally healthy child. You're an incredible father. Evan's eyes burned with tears, but they were good tears. Healing tears. Thank you for showing up when I'd forgotten how to ask for help, he typed back. For refusing to let me destroy myself. For teaching me that strength isn't the same as suffering. You did the hard work yourself. I just held up a mirror. He set the phone down and pulled out his therapy journal, the one Rebecca had him keep. Under today's entry, he wrote, I'm learning that grief and joy can exist in the same heart. That loving someone new doesn't erase someone old. That sometimes losing control is exactly how you find yourself again. I miss Sarah every day. I probably always will. But I'm also building something beautiful with Natalie, and I'm finally present enough to appreciate it. Mia is happy. I'm happy. We're going to be okay. He closed the journal and looked around his small apartment, seeing it clearly for the first time in months. The life he'd built here wasn't perfect. It was messy and complicated and marked by loss. But it was also full of love and laughter and second chances. Full of pancakes on Sunday mornings and bedtime stories and awkward first kisses at charity galas. Full of grief that had softened into memory and fear that had transformed into hope. It was a life worth living, not just surviving, but truly, fully living. And for the first time since Sarah died, Evan could say that and mean it without guilt, without reservation, without the crushing weight of pretending to be okay when he wasn't. He was okay. Not perfect. Not healed completely. But okay in the truest sense of the word. He walked to Mia's room and peeked in, watching her sleep with her elephant clutched close and her new book on the nightstand. Tomorrow they'd read it together. Tomorrow they'd make waffles and maybe go to the park. Tomorrow they'd keep building this life, one small moment at a time. But tonight, Evan stood in the doorway of his daughter's room and let himself feel grateful. Grateful for Natalie's intervention. Grateful for Rebecca's guidance. Grateful for Marcus's friendship. Grateful for Mia's resilience and love. Grateful for the hard work of healing that had brought him to this moment. Grateful for Sarah, whose love had taught him what was possible and whose death had eventually taught him what was necessary. That living fully wasn't a betrayal of loss, but a tribute to it. Sometimes, Evan thought as he closed Mia's door and headed to his own room, sometimes you have to lose everything to remember what truly matters. Sometimes you have to be fired from surviving before you can learn to live. And sometimes, when you're drowning and someone throws you a lifeline, the bravest thing you can do is grab it and hold on. He climbed into bed, exhausted but content, and closed his eyes. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new moments of grief and joy intertwined, new steps on this journey of healing. But tonight, Evan Brooks, widowed father, senior director, survivor of loss and architect of his own redemption, fell asleep with a smile on his face and hope in his heart. The story that had begun with 3 sharp knocks at 9:47 p.m. and the words "you're fired" had led him here, to this quiet moment of peace. Natalie hadn't fired him from his job that night. She'd fired him from the slow death of existing without living. And in doing so, she'd given him back the thing grief had stolen, his life. And this time, Evan was determined not to waste a single precious moment of it.